Okay guys, we're looking at what I'm going to use for a jig or kind of a pattern to follow with my router. This is one of my nephew's sets of toys he had, and if you've seen, I done dumped all his toys out on the floor. Ha ha ha. But anyway, it's not going to damage the box. I'm going to cut the upper about maybe inch of this ring off, maybe 3/4 of an inch. And since it's all just a solid color, it's not going to affect his boxing, and there's extra space in here, and he'll still be able to put his lid on and use it. But I was just looking for things. I had found a butter bowl that was real close, and this is actually slightly larger than what I need, but I think all it's going to do is give us an extra 1/8 of an inch space over what we need. And it's good to have that little bit of extra space so that you could be positive that the dust shield is not going to bind or bump in any way, and it's still going to end up being about 1/8 of an inch away from where our recesses are for our T-nuts. But if you can see, I came along and I moved the joystick to its extremities, diagonally, up and down and left and right, and I made a little mark just to kind of get an outline for the dimensions of a circle that would need to be cut with a router so that this dust washer will have a recess. And then I measured from one side to the other and found out the measurements. That's about 2 7/8 inches, so it's almost 3 inches, but it's 2 7/8 inches. And then I installed my new bit in my router, and I measured from, like, if you see the rightmost cutting edge of the blade to the outside edge of the circle for the plate on the bottom, I measured that, and that's about 1.5 inches exactly. Because whenever this rides around, if you can think about it, when that bit rides around, that outside edge of that bit is, you want it to follow the perforated line that I've drawn there, and then whatever it's riding around as a guide will be on the outside edge of the base plate. So when I measured from the outside edge of the base plate to that cutting edge of the bit on the right side, I got 1.5 inches, and you have to double that because it's going to be 1.5 inches past the perforated line over on the right, and the same thing over here on the left when it cuts around. So that's 3 inches total. You add that to the diameter between the perforated lines, which is 2 7/8, and so 3 plus 2 7/8, you get 5 7/8. So 5 7/8 is about what I was looking for. Well, I said, this is about the closest I can find. I looked at several things laying around the house. You could probably go to the hardware store and find something more specific. And I measured across here. I know that's upside down, but you can see it's about 6 1/8. Goes over to about 6 1/8. So I only needed 5 7/8, so that's about 1/4 inch more than I need. And so that's going to come up to having a circle that is about 1/8 of an inch wider all the way around, than you need. So it's just going to give a little extra space. It'll be like 1/8 of an inch on the left side and 1/8 of an inch on the right side. Just going to give you slightly more than you need. But after measuring it up, that's about a full 1/4 inch between that perforated or dotted line that I drew and the edge of the recess for the T-nut. So it's just going to come about half that distance. You'll still have about 1/8 of an inch of wood right in between that perforated line and that. But should work out pretty good. That should be rigid enough. This is really rigid cardboard. It shouldn't flex too much. I'm going to place it in place, center it up the best I can, and I want to put some of these small 4D electro galvanized finish nails that I use to make the control panel box around the perimeter of the circle at a location every few inches. And when I do that, it should hold it in place and it shouldn't move too much. But anyway, we're going to get started on that, and I think to cut this real evenly where I don't damage the box, I think I'm going to go out and measure it up and just run it by the guide on my table saw and just cut this with the table saw. I'll have to rotate it and make about 3 or 4 passes, but it'll cut it off nice and even, and the box won't look damaged after that. Okay guys, we got our little template or our little jig ready here. It's good hard cardboard. It flexes just a little, but not very much. I don't think it's going to move much. It's got good rigidity to it, and all we got to do is mount it in place. So we're going to take a few measurements and even it up so it's perfectly centered, so that there's an even amount of distance left, right, up and down from the joystick and all. And we're going to take and put some very small nails around the outside of the circle, and hopefully that'll hold it in place and keep the jig from moving when the rider goes around to the edges. And you know, then I guess we'll start rounding, but we're probably not going to round on this piece first. I may just go ahead and put this on a test piece of wood just to make sure that if there's anything that I didn't realize before I started, that I'm not working on the finished piece of control panel. I'm working on a test setup first, and that'll just let me know how that new bit's going to do too, because sometimes you'll get a new router bit, you'll go to use it and it digs into the wood a lot more than you thought. We have to get the depth of the bit right too, because what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set it to not only enough depth to cover the dust washer here, but I want to set it about twice that if I can, because I'm probably going to put either a small piece of plastic or something down in that recess over top of the dust washer that will kind of live in that recess underneath the control panel art, so that the control panel art doesn't stick to the dust washer. So we got to find out what kind of material that'll be. It could be something like plastic, cardboard, or something similar. So be back in a minute. Okay guys, I was just going to show you a little trick here. Some people do like to mount these dust washers up on top of their acrylic on their plexiglass, and somebody in a forum that I read in one time said, well, if you don't want to scratch up your plexi around it, put a little felt up underneath the edge of it, and you know, you could get some that's sticky back like I have right here. I got this at Lowe's. It was about $3 and probably 75 cents, and it's a little pack of felt stick-on cushions, and you can put those up under your dust washers up close to the shaft, and it'll let it kind of float on top of your acrylic. Well, I just seen something. I was looking at different things for circles recently, and I noticed in a pack of CDRs that I've got, and these come in DVDs too, sometimes they come with these little foam rings, and it's not felt, it's foam, but it'd probably serve about the same function. And they already have a hole in the center. It looks like it's the exact size you would need, and it's slightly less diameter than the dust washer, so these would fit perfectly and kind of be hidden underneath there. So if you have some of these laying around and you're doing a project like this, you could probably use these for your joysticks. And this particular packet came with 2 inside there, unless I took these out of another one, I can't remember. But if not, most people buy CDRs or DVDRs. You could salvage these and make your own cushions for underneath your dust washers. Okay guys, I've been scratching my head since last night about doing this control panel overlay and creating the recesses for the dust washers, and I almost got to the point that I was just going to install the dust washers on top, because you know, it was just, you know, I was trying to figure out how to create the recess and put the dust washers in there, and then put on the control panel overlay and the plexiglass without having the adhesive on the back of the control panel overlay sticking to the dust washers. And you know, there's all kind of things I was thinking of, like routing extra deep and putting the dust washers in, and then leaving, you know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch to put another little piece of plastic or something in there that could stick to the back of the control panel overlay, and the dust washer could float underneath it. But that presented its own problems, like trying to properly line that up after I pulled the adhesive off of the control panel overlay. I thought, well, if I already had it in place and set the control panel overlay on, then you know, it would be fine if it was sitting in that routed out area. But you know, there's just all kind of problems that arise from trying to do something like that. And see, I'm really trying to mimic something like this from the Mortal Kombat 2 here. We've got plexi on top, we have the control panel overlay underneath, which of course on this original game here, it's actually, the control panel overlay is a sticker stuck onto a very thin piece of metal. Don't know if you guys can see if I can get that to focus there for you. I'm not going to do it that close. You can kind of see there, we've got plexi here on top, and you can see underneath there, I wasn't perfect with routing out my hole, so you can see underneath, you see the control panel overlay that is actually stuck on a very thin piece of metal. It's probably like, I don't know, 1/32 of an inch, no more than a 1/16 of an inch metal. And the control panel overlay is kind of some textured, really tough stuff. It's a really good overlay. You can clean this good when it gets nasty. And then look, you see your dust washer there. It kind of floats around underneath that metal control panel overlay. And the reason it's allowed to do that is because there's a slight recess that's cut out around here into the wood. It drops down no more than 1/8 of an inch. It's probably like a 1/16 of an inch, I think. That's routed out around there to give this dust washer room to move around underneath there. And I want to mimic that. That's what I'm trying to do. I think what I've come up with is probably the best way to do it. And that is go ahead and use my little cardboard template to cut out the recess, just like with the Mortal Kombats that they have for the dustwasher, and get it as perfect as I can. And then, instead of sticking down the control panel overlay, I believe what I need to do is just leave the 3M backing on. Just don't pull it off. Just don't use the adhesive, because this is going to be sandwiched under plexi. And the plexiglass, even though I'm not putting screws around the edge because I want a cleaner look, it's going to be held down at, good gracious, what? 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 23 points by buttons. And then you're going to have, you know, the joysticks that are mounted through. Well, let's see, no, the joysticks don't give it any support. The buttons give it all the support. Well, you got all those points plus the little trim piece around the trackball holding down the plexi, and just, you know, the size of the plexi and the rigidness of the plexi holding down this artwork underneath. I don't think it's going to ever wrinkle or give any problems. Plus, an added advantage is if I ever have to disassemble this stuff, this isn't stuck on permanently. And it takes care of the problem of the stickiness sticking to the dustwashers, because you just leave the adhesive backing on and it's kind of as slick as wax paper. And that will just let the dustwasher slide around underneath it. Now, some people on some forums have talked about this option, and they've said that, you know, the recess will show up underneath your vinyl overlay. Well, maybe if it was thin, but this stuff is pretty darn thick. I don't know if you can see there, but that's some pretty thick stuff. It almost feels like almost like a canvas, you know. I don't think if it's held tightly underneath there and you've cut out for all the buttonholes and it's holding it reasonably taut, I don't think that with this thickness and the dustwasher underneath it constantly, there's only very small areas around the dustwasher that aren't constantly filled with some type of material as the dustwasher floats around. I just don't think there's going to be any noticeable recess there. So I think that's what we're going to do. And, you know, I just, you know, it's the first time I've actually done this, manufacturing my own control panel like this. So I'm like, yeah, I just want to make sure I get it right and don't have to go back and order another control panel overlay by screwing this one up or anything. And I really don't want those dust washers embedded in there permanently, where the only way to get them out would be to remove the control panel overlay. So I think this is the best option. And there is another option too. If I would have got another piece of plexi as thin as what I'm going to use, or even thinner, I could have adhered this to that and made basically like mimicking the metal control panel on the Mortal Kombats and Mortal Kombat 2s. I could have mimicked that by, instead of using a sheet of metal, just get some plexi, cut it out first, just like you were going to do a control panel overlay, but have your artwork on it, stuck to it first, so that when you drill through it, you make buttonholes drilling through the artwork and the plexi at the same time, and you create your own little kind of metal control panel by using plexi. And then on top of that, you could still sandwich another layer of thin plexi to protect the surface of the control panel overlay. The only problem with that is I've already rounded my groove using a slot cutter around the control panel top, and I have it set so that the edge of the T-molding is sticking up just enough to cover this artwork, and then just about half of the thickness of the plexi top, just so it's kind of keeping the edges from being hit by anybody's wrist or hand and kind of popping up, especially since I'm not going to have screws all around the outside edges of the control panel top. And if I put another layer of plexi, then there's going to be like a whole sheet of plexi that's sitting up higher than the T-molding, plus half of the thickness that I allowed for the original plexi I was going to use. So had I not already rounded out for that T-molding, I would have either got a little wider T-molding and done it with 2 sheets of plexi, or I would have just set the T-molding slightly higher, and it would have left very slight bit, maybe a 1/16 of an inch of wood showing around the bottom edge of the control panel top, and I could have painted it a dark color or even a blue to match T-molding. It would have not been noticeable, but I think this is the option we're going to go with. So right now I'm just going to get in here and route out these recesses for the dust washers, and then come back and take care of this stuff. First thing I want to do, guys, is test this out. I got a scrap piece of plywood here, and I'm putting down the little template that I cut out of the round cardboard tube. I'm going to use some of these little 4D galvanized nails, and I'm going to tack around it every few inches just to kind of give it some support on the outside edge so it doesn't slip out from the placing that I have it. Then the rider goes down in there and it circulates around there and starts cutting the hole, and then I fill in the center moving the router around. So we're just going to test it on here and just see how it does. We're going to test the depth, set it to what we think it should be for the dust washer, and just do it to see if there's any unforeseen circumstances before we actually get to working on the real control panel. If it all works out well here, we'll just go ahead and do it on the real control panel. Okay guys, I'm setting my router depth for the plunge bit here, straight plunge bit, and I'm setting it just deep enough so that the thickness of this dust washer will be what we're routing out. I set it just a little deeper than that, just so it's not going to have any problems binding at all. And when I cut it out, it should just barely have some free play up and down in there. It's not going to be much, just enough so that this will slide around without any kind of friction. And now we're going to go ahead and go outside, and we're going to route into the piece that I've put the form on, and I'll show you what that looks like before we get started. Okay, we've got our little template in place, and we've put nails. We've put about 8 nails around the outside edge of it, and that's going to hold it in place. It's not going to move. Now you can still take it out if you wanted to. You can pull it out, but it's pretty tight in there. And that's just holding it in its perfect form like a circle. And we're going to turn the router on here in a second and go around the inside of it and see if it makes a pattern like we need. I've got this on some temporary pieces of 2x4 right now, and I don't think I'm going to clamp it down right now. I will the final control panel, but I think I got pretty good control of that small router, and I'm just going to put a knee on this side and just go around through there. And in a real situation, you would clamp it down, or you could screw the panel down to like some 2x4s or a work table or something, just to keep it from moving around. Well, we got the test done, and to me, really pretty good results. The circle's not perfect, which doesn't matter. You're not going to see it once it's covered with the artwork and all. But the reason the circle's not perfect is we are dealing with something flexible like cardboard, and that's a high RPM router, and it will push a little bit on the form when it's going around it. Now I could have minimized that by putting more nails in. I don't think that's really necessary. Also, when you drive the nails in, the nails may go in at a slightly bit of an angle instead of straight up and down, and some areas where the nails are, if you don't get them dead perfect, it'll allow a little more flex in the form when you're moving the router around. But I think it turned out really good, nice, clean, not dead circular, but it doesn't matter because the artwork is going to cover it. And you set the dust washer in there, and you see it moves around just fine, and it's clearing the edge. You feel just a little lip there. That's exactly what I wanted. And the minimum amount of clearance that we needed from left to right to make sure the joystick moved its full distance was 2 7/8, and I just measured this, and this is actually just barely over 3 across here, and everything's at least 3 inches, so we're beating that by at least 1/8 of an inch, and it shouldn't be too wide so that the artwork will fall down in there or anything. So doing pretty good, so I think we can move on and do it on the real control panel now. Okay guys, we got this spaced out perfectly. We just measured from our center where our hole is for our joystick, and got to even them out to the left and the right, up and down, and there's ways to figure that. You can just figure the diameter of this and then subtract the diameter of this hole and then divide it in 2, and that gives you the amount that needs to be from here to there, and from here to there, and from here to there in each point. And that's what I did. If you see here, made little tiny marks there at each point. And then I'd put it in place and put the nails in around it. And I had to put 2 kind of offset here because we was close to the edge instead of putting it dead center. But we're going to route it now and see how it turns out. Okay, guys. Turned out better than the sample, actually. I think it's better than the sample. Got a few places it feels like it's not dead on smooth in there, but I think that what that is once you take the material out of the center right there, instead of balancing the cutting bit from here to there, that rider base is almost the same size as this cutout, and I might have been letting it tilt just slightly, but I think it's fine. It's only very minimal differences around in there, and I can run the rider around another time or two and just see if that makes a difference. If I'd had a larger base on the router, it probably wouldn't have done that, but then I would have needed an even bigger circle to use this type of template. But I think it's going to work fine. Let me see, I think I done put the dust washer in. No, I think I got it over there. And there we go. Sit inside there and move around. Looks like it'll work out good. And we came real close to our bolts, but didn't cut into where the bolts were, which I don't think it would have hurt anyway. I've seen some designs on some older games. I can't remember what it was. Somebody was talking about online where this was routed out and these were like included as an extension of the router, just so that could recess down in there. But these are recessed almost the exact same depth as this, so I could have done it as just like one big circle probably, and lined everything up, and that would have worked too, but it would have just been more of a recess that the artwork has to go over and has a chance of dimpling in, and you can see the impression from the top. But if you notice, like if this dust washer's in place, it's about the same thickness as the cutout. I mean, it's almost dead. This is just slightly proud. The wood's just slightly proud. Anywhere this dust washer moves, you only have just that little bit of space. It's like 3/4 of an inch that there's no support for the artwork. And it doesn't stay there forever. I mean, the joystick recenters itself. So most of the time with the joystick centered, you just have this little bit right here that there's no support for the artwork for. And as the joystick moves around, it moves around under the artwork. I don't think you're ever going to see much dimpling in of the artwork from that. But now we're going to take our nails out, pop off this form, put it on the other side, and do the other one. Okay, got our second side set up, and we're going to router that. Okay guys, we got the second one done. Turned out, I think, probably better than either of the first two. Still, you have little places where it doesn't look like a perfect circle, but this one turned out better because I think I wasn't afraid to put a little pressure against the form, and I think that helped round out my edges. Now see, that one still looks good, but there's a little more lump to the edges of the corner, little flat places here and there. Doesn't really matter because the washer's not even going to go quite that far. It'll probably come within a 1/16 of an inch or so of the edges. But it cut out really pretty good. Didn't have too much trouble. And I found out one reason that my first one looked so uncircular was I was using for the router to ride against, I was using the factory edge, which I figured was the best edge to use on the bottom for the base plate of the router to ride against. But turns out there's some mushrooming to it. If you can see, there's some mushrooming where my nephew had been putting the cap on and off of those toys, and it was causing problems because the router was following that mushrooming. But further on down, where I actually cut it, is actually much cleaner. So I flipped it upside down and did it the other way, and the router rode against the nice fresh cut edge that I cut. I just cut this on my table saw actually. Just cut that top part of that box off. And now we got to take our nails out and just make sure the control panel's good and clean. And I did leave the bases of my joysticks under there. Maybe not the best idea, but it took a long time to tighten these down. I didn't have the correct Allen bit to fit these for my drill, so I did them by hand, and I already got them torqued like I wanted. So I just left them in, and I'm just going to make sure I take the air hose and blow out these working mechanisms of the joystick down in here. Not that much to it, it's just a spring and everything. And just make sure those are good and clean, and the cherry switches on the back are good and clean and everything. So talk to you in a few minutes. Well, I got it all done, guys, as far as the routing for the dust washers. Seems like they work pretty well. End up with close to 1/8 of an inch around them, so it's a little more than I needed, but that means these dust washers are never going to bump. Never going to have a problem with that. If I would have got them a little closer, there's a little less likelihood that the artwork would kind of dip right there, but hopefully with the support of the dust washer underneath it, it'll never be noticeable, and you'll have plexi on top keeping it tight, so I think we'll be okay. Works good on both sides. Got the same amount of clearance. Sits almost dead perfect. So just glad my calculations and measurements were correct, and nothing didn't go haywire when I was using the router, because it could have really gouged up the top. So looking good there. Now we just got to get to applying the artwork, and just notice now it's a moot point that I painted the top of this. I've done that not only to make it bright so that the artwork will look brighter. A lot of people say if you paint it black or something, the artwork doesn't pop as much. But I did that for that reason, plus also to give it a little bit of a glossier finish for the artwork to stick to. Well, now since I'm not going to peel off the backing for the stickiness, most likely this is not really even something that needed to be done. But it's alright that I did. It didn't take me but a few minutes one night with some spray paint, so no big deal. And it kind of helps bond the wood, since it's kind of a rough grain. Keeps it from splintering as much once you paint it. Even edges, if you have problems with edges of plywood splintering, if you paint it, it keeps it from splintering quite as bad. So that's sometimes a good idea. But we've got to get to doing the artwork now.